Good afternoon, fourth grade. Today we're going to continue reading in our American Revolution text, and we are going to talk about the two different armies. So by the end of today, you'll be able to compare and contrast the Confederate Army with the British Army. So before we get started, you have a quick write. It says, why do teams wear different jerseys? What would happen in a game if they had the same uniform? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. It says, what is the main idea of the text? And remember, we are going to ask our how or why question about the title to be able to find that main idea. Our vocabulary for today is grenade. That's a small bomb that you can throw at an enemy. So you draw a line to this picture. The next one is bayonet. That is a sword-like stabbing blade that's attached to a rifle, and you can use it when you get close enough to your enemy that they're too close to shoot, so you can just stab them with your bayonet. So draw a line to this picture. The last one is infantry, and that is another word for a group of soldiers that are on foot. So they're not the Air Force, and they're not the Navy, which is on water. They're the infantry, which means they're on land. All right, turn the page in your notes. And remember, the first thing we're going to do is ask that how or why question about the title so that we can find our main idea. And so our title is the Two Armies. And so our how or why question today is, how were the two armies in the American Revolution different? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to read. And as we're reading, we're going to underline the answer to that question. How were the two armies different? Nicknamed redcoats because of their red jackets, the British Army came from England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. They were joined by thousands of German soldiers called Hessians, as well as American loyalists. The American Revolutionary Army consisted of blue or brown-coated regiments raised by the Continental Congress, or Continentals, and regiments belonging to the states. Civilians also often fought for the Revolution as it swept into their region. Continental and British infantry carried smooth-bore muskets and used the same basic battle tactics, massed firing by ranks and charging with the bayonet. All right, so if we have information underlined about both armies, we know that the British Army were called redcoats because they wore red and they came from Europe. And the American Revolutionary Army, they were called Continentals. They wore blue and brown and they came from North America. And so for our main idea, we would write down the two armies in the American Revolution were the redcoats, who were the British Army, and the American Revolutionary Army, which was made up of Continentals. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 2. It says, who were the redcoats? And if we go back in our text, it tells us that the redcoats were the British Army from England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. They were also made up of some Germans and some American loyalists. So in 2A, we would write the redcoats were the British Army. The soldiers mostly came from Europe, but they also included American loyalists. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2B. It says, why were they called the redcoats? And if we go back in our text, it says, nicknamed the redcoats because of their red jackets. So in 2B, we would write down the British Army wore bright red coats, which contrasted to the brown and blue jackets of the rebel soldiers. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 3. It says, who made up the American Revolutionary Army? If we go back in our text, we know that it says the American Revolutionary Army consisted of blue or brown coated regiments raised by the Continental Congress and regiments belonging to the states. So we know that the Continental Congress drafted people to the Army as well as each state. So it was made up of people from North America. It also says that it was made up of regular civilians. So in box 3A, we would write, the American Revolutionary Army was made up of the Continentals, who were raised by the Continental Congress and regiments created by the states. They also included civilians. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3B. It says, why would civilians join the war effort? And if we go back in our text, it says civilians also fought for the revolution as it swept into their region. And so we know that civilians fought because the British Army came to their town. And so they had to fight the British Army away. Like they had to fight so that the British Army would leave. So they were kind of forced to fight if the British Army came to their town. So in 3B, we would write, civilians might join the Revolutionary Army because the war was happening in America. Civilians were being affected by the war because it took place at home. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 4. It says, how were the two armies different? Well, we know that the two armies, they wore different uniforms, different colored uniforms, and they also had, their soldiers came from different places. The British soldiers came from Europe, and the American soldiers came from North America. And so in box 4A, we would write, the two armies were made up of different groups of people. The British Army was made up of people who were loyal to the king, whereas the American Revolutionary Army was made up of people who wanted American independence from Great Britain. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 4B. It says, how might these differences affect the war? So we know that Great Britain had a reputation for being really great at fighting wars. And the American colonists were very inexperienced. And they didn't have as many materials as the British Army because the British Army had more money than the colonists did. And so in 4B, we would write down the British Army was made up of soldiers from countries that were already developed. This means that they probably had more materials and experience and required less training. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. The paragraph states, how were the two armies in the American Revolution different? And you can get that answer from 4A, and when you're explaining it, you can also talk about 4B.